in defense of the hockey hardcores leader, Fan Radio Network.
It's frustrating.
And KFAN.com. 2 minutes and 2 seconds past 3 o'clock Central Daylight Time. We welcome you back. It is a midweek edition of the Bumper to Bumper program. My name is Dan Barreiro, the host of the show, former Ink Stain Wretch newspaper of the Twin Cities. Guardsy is jetting westward to Sacramento, California, to chronicle the Golden Gopher women's basketball team in the Sweet 16, a game that you can hear on a Friday night right here on the Fan. As soon as we wrap things up, I believe, at 6:30. So Brett Blakemore is back in that chair. You'll be in that chair tomorrow, and presumably you'll be in that chair Friday.
That is correct.
Guardsy, the plan is that Guardsy's going to join us maybe for a solid hour tomorrow, and then he will offer a preview during the Friday Football Beast at a time to be determined. Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line has indeed been rebooted. It was almost seamless today to get on. I'm surprised. I know eventually the other shoe will drop. 64686 if you would like to join the festivities and the conversation this afternoon. The uglydeck.com guest lineup includes guests on the 30s, as we like to say in the business. The redoubtable NBA reporter extraordinaire Mitch Lawrence will join at 3:30 this afternoon. At 4:30, the equally redoubtable John Bream, music critic, Star Tribune, back. First time in a while he's been on the show, but there's some very timely stuff, I believe, to discuss with him, including a rather lukewarm review from Bream on Minnesota legend Bob Dylan's concert up north. So we'll get to that. And the fact that he also this is a good feather in the cap of any reporter. Got an exclusive Q&A with Bruce Springsteen, who's coming back to town this weekend to perform as well. So there you have it. 5:30 goes without saying. It's Wednesday, so Kessler is scheduled to join at the bottom of the 5 o'clock hour as well. I want to follow up on a subject that we did touch on yesterday, or at least I did. I find myself in a very unusual position, but I'm doubling down on it, inspired perhaps by the most recent column of Friday regular Lavelle E. Neal III. Lavelle went all in on the Gopher men's hockey hire of Brett Larson. That's legal. It's his column. You know, this is all about opinion. There are a number of people who are hailing the hire. The hire may end up being the best in the history of the University of Minnesota hockey program, a program that has a rich tradition. That debate can go on forever. Although I would say that there's something a bit disingenuous in the world of sports to necessarily be either surprised or angry about differences of opinion on that hire or any hire. I mean, if we really mean that we want to take that away from fans and from all of us, that there can be no disagreement and no reason to question a hire, we're not in this sports business for long. The debate about a hire, about a trade, about a strategy is what fuels, for a lot of people, even more than betting, although that's starting to change, interest in sports. The ability to sort of participate in whatever that vigorously in whatever that debate is. Doesn't mean you're right, but it means that's part of the fuel that the whole sports concept provides you. So to be surprised that there might not be unanimity on any hire, but certainly this hire, I find a bit disingenuous. And I got into this subject a little bit yesterday, inspired by a texter, that there's some people who think there's a disconnect between demanding Motzko's firing and not heartily embracing his replacement. And I'm thinking to myself, why? Who set up those rules? Now, would I have been the group that said Motzko had to go? Probably not. I thought there was still too much in the resume. I probably would have given him another year to figure this thing out. Maybe he didn't want to. We're never going to know the whole story about the whole mutual thing, how mutual it actually was. But I don't think you necessarily have to be a great hockey mind to say the record for Brett Larson as coach is not unimpeachable. It's not so over the top great that you're not allowed to be disappointed or to think, I wish they would have looked around a little bit longer, wish perhaps they would have been a little bit more ambitious. It shouldn't really matter that he was at St. Cloud. I know for some people that prejudices the case, and that's a mistake too. The idea, we're going back to St. Cloud again? Why are we going back there? But the idea that a number of hockey luminaries have either endorsed the pick or have said he's one of several good choices that are there, that's fine. But the hockey hardcore, I don't think, is obligated to say, well, then there can be no discussion. There can be no debate on this particular hire. We get into that mode, and I do it too, where these are the irrational fringe people who are never satisfied, and they're always looking for the next big thing. And why even attempt to reason with the lunatic fringe in that regard? I get that in general. But I would again submit to you, I don't think you have to be lunatic fringe to not necessarily hail this as the greatest hire in the history of the school. I mean, I'm looking at the resume. I'm looking at the numbers. Coached 2 years in the USHL. Long time ago, granted. And his first season went 29-30-1, finished in 5th place, lost in what's called the conference quarterfinals. Second year in Sioux City, 23-30-11, finished even lower in the standings, and then missed the postseason altogether. He goes to St. Cloud, and brilliant seasons early, 36-30, 6-3. Then after a 13-5-6, that was the year the tournament was canceled, COVID year. 20-11-0, NCAA runner-up. Can't argue with that, right? After that, 18-15-4, with a 10-10-4 in the conference, 25-13-3, 4th place in the conference. In those 2 years, lost in the regional semis and the regional final. And then the last 2 years didn't make the postseason at all. Well, actually, last 3, correct? I've got 11. Let's do overall records. It's easier. 17-16-5, 14-21-1. And this year, I wouldn't say is another record to write home about. So I'm going to stand tall, and maybe I'll regret it, I don't know, for the hockey hardcores and say there can be some disagreement on this. The dismissiveness of the tone from our guy Lavelle's column basically made it sound like we just hired the John Wooden of hockey. And I don't think we know that. It may turn out fine, like I said. Now, you're a more pro hockey guy, I think, than college hockey guy, but you're welcome to get involved in this discussion. And I, again, find myself in a rare position where I'm trying to defend the loons or those perceived as never satisfied, unrealistic in their expectations. But I don't see a resume here I go, slam dunk. No brainer. Why would there even be any discussion about anybody else? Do you?
I think we just have this discussion, and I'm not an elite Huskies mind.
Nor am I.
But what I will say is that we have this discussion about coaches all the time in this town. For instance, the other Gopher coach that we love to rip is PJ Fleck.
Correct.
What's the defense every time we rip PJ Fleck? Who could you possibly
get who's better?
So then if let's say they were to get rid of PJ Fleck and they hired someone else who was less than enthused, then those same people would go, see, you asked for it. You asked for it. So
that's true too.
It's not, you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, but you can't. I don't know. I'm willing to see it and let it play out.
Well, that's the other thing that's annoying me. Everybody will. It's not like there's going to be picketers outside Mariucci on this hire. This notion that, you got to give him a chance. People are going to give him a chance. He just got hired. You're allowed to react to it if you're a sports fan, either applauding it or saying, okay, yeah, I guess. I'm not sure that it's, looks like he's on the path to the coaching Hall of Fame exactly. But maybe it's the old, he's going to have more, to work with here, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's going to give him a chance. Now, maybe they won't give him enough of a chance. Maybe they'll jump fast if he starts slow, but everybody's going to give him a chance. But you know what I know? The business is, having an opinion, especially if you're invested in what you think a coach represents, or whether you go, wow, this looks really good. And in the end, the rest of it is always what counts, right? We talk all the time about, did he win the press conference? And what have we learned over the years? The press conference means little. If you don't succeed, if you don't win the right percentage of games, nobody's going to go back and go, I'll tell you what, though, man, the day he was introduced, he was hot. I mean, he was pithy. He had clever observations. He said all the right things. Nobody cares about that, right? So we all know that eventually it will be about what the coach, he or she, is able to do. And, I just think that, like I said, I find myself in a very unusual position trying to defend, if you want to call them the hardcores or the loons or the fringes that are never satisfied. And I'll say that, I have no problem arguing on this point with Lavelle on Friday, because Lavelle just made it sound like, well, what do you want? You wanted Motzko out and now you're unhappy with this guy? Well, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can think both. Yes, you can think both. You can think neither if you want. But the idea that this is preposterous, how could anybody doubt? Because within the network here of some respected hockey names, this is a no-brainer. Okay, that's fine, but you don't have to necessarily be a party to that. You don't necessarily have to agree with that as well. So mark down the date. What's today, the 25th? March 25th, 2026, when the hockey ambassador actually agrees with the folks who are being described as the delusional, unrealistic, lunatic fringe Gopher fans. I'm actually on this one on your side, at least to the extent that I'm defending your right to not be overjoyed. I don't think you have to apologize for that in any way, shape, or form. I don't even think that makes you necessarily all that delusional.
The Fan.
We'll get to this with Kessler later, because my assumption is he will gladly carry Lester Bagley's water on this story like he has so many times before. But many of you, I know by now, have heard that the Vikings have submitted a bid to play host to the 2028 NFL Draft. It's a good follow-up to what we were discussing as recently as either Thursday or Friday. I think I led the show with it. That in Pittsburgh, they've closed public schools for 3 days when they host the draft. So I'm assuming that'll be part of our pledge. We're going to take the kids out of school just so there's greater convenience and fewer traffic problems. I hope that's not the case. I hope we'll rise above that. I hope we value education more than they apparently do in Pittsburgh, PA. But we'll get into that in a little more detail a little bit later in the program. A 763 guy writes, okay, Skip Bayless. Good cheap shot from 763 guy. The fatal flaw is, if I were doing Bayless on the opening salvo in the show, I would predict that Brett Larson will crash and burn and not even have a single winning season. By the way, I may be in the minority of one because I worked with him. Write this down if some people will consider it worthy of PST 2026. When I worked alongside Bayless in Dallas, when he was a columnist and I was a lowly reporter, there was not a staffer in the sports department who was more encouraging, more generous, and more available to sort of, get help on things or just get opinions and give you advice. Maybe PST for some people, because I know how most people feel about Bayless, and I'm not here to defend everything that he did. But, come on. Come on, man. Regarding Larson's record, you're right. By the way, let me get one other update there. His record this past year was 16, 19, and 1. Did not have that at my fingertips when I was giving the record up until then. But don't forget, he's been coaching in a much tougher league at St. Cloud than the Big Ten. Gopher fans don't want to admit it, but the truth cannot be controversial. No Big Ten team has won a national title since 2007, while 7 of the last 9 champs are from the NCHC. Time will tell. The problem I have with reducing it to if you want it is on the basis of that logic, then Big Ten men's basketball stinks, and it doesn't. You can say it should have had a national champion in that case more recently than it did, given the pedigree. But I think that's a little dangerous. But I get his point. Gophers will never win another title, and it's all thanks to the Big Ten. NCHC will forever run NCAA men's hockey. I just don't like it when they rip the hell out of the guy because he is not good enough for their precious Gophers. Again, I've heard that sentiment. But you're going to have to diagram the sentence for me. Not good enough for their precious Gophers. That's the team they salute. That's the team they follow. They want the best possible hire for a program that historically has been one of the best in the country. I don't know what exactly is all that outrageous about it. Not sure. Maybe people are jumping on this because we have been an impatient fan base for all sports in general. Seems like we tend to not give a proper chance or afford patience and grace to new players and coaches. That's no different here than any other market. There's no difference. Trust me. And does some of that exist? Yeah, it always does. But in this case, as I said, he's going to have a chance. They're not going to be picketing the building. It's just the instant reaction that has been part of sports, believe it or not, long before we were 24/7 online. Now, we may see more irrational behavior because of it, fueled by online stuff, but people have been debating coaching dismissals and hires for as long as I've been on this earth, which is now 71 years and beyond. So I don't know why people think this is so irrational or so unusual. There are people who said, come on now, he's going to have more to work with here, maybe, although we just heard, well, part of it was he was in a better conference before. Early success with Moscow players, we did make that point. That can be unfair to a coach because to a certain extent, you could say, well, if you maximize, then you don't have to ever apologize, even if it's somebody else's players. Now, if you don't sustain, and quite frankly, the record has turned far more average and kind of meandering since the really good start, you're allowed to acknowledge that. You're allowed to then wonder, what does that mean in terms of the ability to attract, the right coach, etc. Real quick, because I don't know if we're going to have time to get to this later. Let me hit the, I got the wrong mouse. Let me get it. I'm hoping we are able to get a little more depth on this. If I'm able to make contact with him. But there's a breaking story that we have discussed before and is pretty significant that is not related to the toy department at all. And it's that LA jury court case involving Meta and Google. And as our guy Gerald Posner, who I've been trying to reach out to, has tweeted, I'll just give you the way he characterizes it to just sort of introduce you to it if you've not heard about that breaking news. Tech's big tobacco turning point just happened. An L.A. jury just did something no court has done before. It held Meta and Google negligent for how their platforms are designed. Not the content, he emphasizes, but the systems. Jurors found the companies failed to warn users, specifically children, about risks tied to features like algorithmic recommendations, autoplay, and persistent notifications. This is the first major verdict to treat social media design itself as a potential source of harm. The case centered on a young woman who said years of compulsive use of Instagram and YouTube, beginning in childhood, led to severe mental health consequences, including body dysmorphia, depression, and suicidal ideation. The defense argued her struggles were rooted in prior trauma and that the platforms were not designed to maximize time or addiction. The jury ultimately disagreed. He writes this may be the closest thing yet to a big tobacco turning point for tech, not because of damages alone, but because of the theory of liability. He notes that plaintiffs are increasingly bypassing Section 230 protections by focusing not on user-generated content, but on product design. And that shift, he says, is important. It opens the door to arguing that engagement systems themselves are not neutral tools, but engineered behavioral loops. Very well summarized by our guy Gerald. I hope to get him on this subject, if not later today, even tomorrow or Friday. But it's a case we talked to last time we had him on. He previewed the case and also emphasized his belief that this could be a major departure in that regard, even as some legal eagles thought that the case was not a particularly strong one in some ways, no matter how you feel about big tech, et cetera. So we'll keep an eye on that. Wanted to bring it to the listeners' attention in case you missed it, and if we can add him today, tomorrow, or Friday to flesh out the story a little bit more, we will indeed do so. How about our guy, NBA big knocker, Mitch Lawrence? There's much to get to with him. I might rant to Mitch, and I'm curious to see if he'll agree with me on this particular rant. We'll get to some other things as well. If you have questions, Wolves related, otherwise NBA rated, Bradshaw and Bryant, KFAN.com, 64686.
The Fan celebrates our $5,000 winning Teachers, and iHeartRadio's Thank a Teacher. It's powered by Donors Choose, and there's still time to nominate a public school teacher making a difference. They could be the next to win $5,000 to make over their classroom. Do it now, iHeartRadio.com/teachers, iHeartRadio.com/teachers.
As I mentioned, Power Pack broadcast today. I should say, at Scoggins yesterday, but today at 5:30 will be Kessler in studio. John Bream to talk about Springsteen coming back to town this weekend, and he attended a Dylan concert and was apparently underwhelmed. That'll be at 4:30. Mitch Lawrence, NBA big knocker, joins us now via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Our sub-producer just mentioned a teacher-related contest. Did you go public school all the way, Mitch?
Oh, yeah.
You're a public school guy. Okay. So whether you're talking about grade school, middle school, or high school, who was the most memorable teacher that you remember?
Well, a guy by the name of Gil Gibbs. He died early, died very young.
Oh.
He didn't make 40, but what he did do, I was on the boys lacrosse team, and he built a team that was recognized back in the early 70s as the number one public school team outside of Baltimore, Long Island. I'm sure the listeners are going, what the hell is this guy talking about? But back then, all the major college programs got their best players out of Long Island or Baltimore. And he built a program where we sent guys to all the major Division I programs back in the day. And he probably had a lot of influence on me, had a lot of influence on other players, on guys who played for him. And he's in the National Hall of Fame.
Nice.
He's in New Jersey Hall of Fame. And like I said, it was tragic that he passed away because he would have had an even greater career, but died when he was 39 of cancer.
Man. Oh, man. That's rough. That's obviously way too young.
Yep.
All right. Where do we begin? Well, I'll just give you, I guess, maybe a toss-up question here. What NBA story is at the top of your list right now? It can be a team. It could be a controversy. It could be a situation. It could be a dilemma. What's at the top of the Mitch Lawrence pyramid right now when it comes to talkable, interesting stories for you?
Well, I mean, the news today, which has been floated out there for weeks about the expansion situation regarding Seattle and Las Vegas, that's pretty newsy. It also is interesting that it kind of takes the bad spotlight away from the tanking that's been going on. This is the worst year of tanking that we've ever seen. It's a little positive news in some ways for the league, although I'm sure there's some people, including myself, is like, do we really need two more teams? Is there enough talent for two more teams? We were saying years ago when they went from, when I started covering the league, the Mavericks back, you were there in Dallas in the late 80s, mid-80s, there were 23 teams. This will take it to 32.
Right.
So there can be an argument made that, whoa, maybe we should be contracting teams. I used to write about that when they were bringing in the teams, not necessarily the Minnesota phase, but I remember, they gave Charlotte back in 2004. Bob Johnson was the owner. He paid $300 million for the Charlotte Bobcats in 2004. And we were like, why are they adding another team? What's the deal here? So, but it is interesting because now it seems to be, he paid $300 million, Dan. Now the rumor is the two teams coming in are the entry fee is going to be like $7 to $10 billion.
You can't make it up, can you? It's insane.
And by the way, is anybody in Oklahoma? I mean, it's crazy to think Oklahoma City is going to get a share of a team that came in from the town they used to be in, but they left. Right?
Yes.
Seattle. That doesn't seem right, does it?
No, you're right about that. That's true. That does seem to be a little bit off.
It was approved by the league, so I guess they're going to get their share. But, that's the newsiest thing. And then, during this time in the NCAA tournament, we all, I'm watching the games where the top players are involved in terms of the draft. So, I'm very interested in what Darren Peterson did. Yeah. I'm very interested in what Darius Akoff's going to do against Arizona. You still have got Cam Boozer and Duke. So that's also kind of topical in its own way.
There's no question. Of course, what fans are rooting for here from an expansion standpoint is they want Minnesota to be the team that moves over to the Eastern Conference. I keep hearing they're on the short list, but there may be a couple other teams that do that as well. I don't even know how they begin to negotiate that or make that decision. I think back in the David Stern days, it probably would have been a vote of one, and it was said, I'm deciding this is what we're going to do because I just think it's the best trade-off, so to speak. It certainly would make sense given the number of teams not that far away, obviously flight-wise, that are already in the East, to put Minnesota in the East. And clearly, with how much deeper the West has tended to be, I don't think there would be much objection from A-Rod and company either.
Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work either. I know that, I don't know if it's still true, but I knew at one point New Orleans people wanted that franchise.
That's true. East. Yeah, that's right.
And I'm sure there's probably people in Memphis.
Memphis, yep.
And by the way, if I were the league, I would take either Memphis or New Orleans and move one of those teams to Las Vegas. Now I know you're giving up a ton of money.
That's your answer.
Literally.
Yeah.
But I mean, are either of those markets doing anything of note?
No.
And I don't think, there'll be some hue and cry from the diehards down there, but boy, or over there, I should say, but boy, yeah, we're going to expand, yet we're going to still have some pretty weak markets. But my favorite comments on Twitter today when people are posing the question, what are the cities that really deserve an NBA franchise? A few people from Sacramento said, we do.
Good line. Hard to argue with him right now, yeah. That's it.
Those poor people, they've been waiting for a franchise for years.
There are columnists who could retire on that line. Say, that's it. I'm not going to have a line any better than that. That's a very good point. By the way, did I see a headline yesterday that the salary cap is actually going to go down a little bit? In
going down.
And does that have to do more with some of these regional TV deals? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what everybody's saying. I mean, it's hard to believe after they got a $76 billion national TV deal with all the streaming involved and everything that the cap's going to go down. So, but it was, reported that it's because it's the regional problems. Now, I don't know. I'm curious about that in a way. I don't think it's a sign that there's problems, although there's some problems, obviously, with some regional telecasts. But it's not in the market I'm in now, which is the Dallas market, I don't think. And they could be in those markets that I brought up before, Memphis, New Orleans, who knows? Maybe even, I don't know what Sacramento's doing. I think it probably has to do with the state of your franchise.
One of the other big subjects, and you hinted at it, was the ongoing tanking debate discussion. Right. There's another one that is kind of gaining momentum as well. And I don't know if we touched on this or not last time we talked, but there's some updates, even if we did. And that has to do with players, some really good players having great seasons, perhaps being left out of much of the postseason, awards because they're not going to meet the 65-game threshold. And the update to the story was, I think it was just within the last couple of days, the NBA Players Union, they're getting in on it now and saying this can't stand, especially as it's punishing Cade Cunningham, given the significance of his injury. But I do find it, Mitch, a bit rich when part of the complaint from the union is, there's incentive bonuses. This is costing our players money, and it made me chuckle because I'm thinking, in effect, what they seem to be saying, the union, is, we weren't all that worried about your money as a ticket buyer when, you're the best player you expected to see on a given night wasn't there. But now this is about our money, and now we are concerned about it. I still have zero sympathy for that argument, given my belief that the rules were put in place, the limits were put in place because they had to be, even if they're now having unintended consequences.
Exactly. I mean, go back to why the rule was put in place. The thing had gotten so bad with load management and players taking games off that the league decided we have to step in and set this basic floor, which is, just think about how ridiculous it is on its own merits, in a way, that you're saying you got to play at least 65 games. Those of us who have been around the league and you had to drag people off the court, not just Michael Jordan, but you had to drag basically everybody off the court for them to take a break. Now players are just, hey, I don't feel like playing, or they're hiding behind, well, the team's medical people say I can't play in the second game of back-to-back. And nobody ever talked about the ripple effects with the fans, how the fans are getting jobbed here. They're getting screwed because they're not seeing the top players, and that's really why this whole thing started. When it came in, I thought 65 was nuts. I thought it should have been 75. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you pick 65 to begin with? That's almost a quarter of the season, which is ridiculous. So, and hey, unfortunately for Cade Cunningham, that's the way it goes. I feel bad for him, but too bad. I mean, part of being great. And I know, look, he took a knee to the back and he has a collapsed lung, but part of being great is always like your availability game in and game out. And other superstars have missed significant time. Michael Jordan had a broken foot early on. And
True.
We saw it
That's right.
happen with, other great players that sometimes they have to go on the shelf. But look, the great ones play, you see next to on their bios, it's 82, 82, 82. You know, the Karl Malone's, John Stockton, an example, which is now players today must say those guys are nuts for playing all those games without missing 4 games in 19 years or whatever. It's crazy. But that was one of the great things about these players was they were always, you could always count on them, whether you were home in Utah or watching the Jazz come in on the road, Dan, they'd be playing, and other guys too. It wasn't just limited to them. So yeah, it's unfortunate for some of these guys who aren't going to make the 65 games. But what are you going to do? I mean, this is all a product of the league had to do something rash to force guys to play.
Yeah, and what you're indicating is that those players did have respect for the ticket buyers' money in a way that the union is now conveniently leaving that part of it out when they're complaining about, we got big bonuses here, we got players who are going to miss out on an extra $5 million here, $10 million there. Sorry, I can't feel that bad for them.
Right, and I mean, I remember, I think it was Kobe Bryant who actually talked about he wanted to play as much as he could, and he referenced how Michael Jordan had said at some point he wanted to, I'm going to play as much as I can every game if I can because, there are fans who come to see us, maybe in Chicago, maybe on the road, who have never seen me play in person. They can see me on TV, but it's different, and I want to be able to do that. And so it came to be Kobe had the Mamba mentality. And when all these players talk about they love Kobe Bryant, they never talk about the Mamba mentality when it comes to playing games. That's the real Mamba mentality of I'm going to be out there game in and game out, as close to 82 as I can, not just to help my team and help my team win, but also it's a fan thing too, respect for the fans and the people putting out their hard-earned money to watch me play.
Mitch Lawrence joining us, NBA Big Knocker. You can hear him on Sirius XM, the NBA channel, early and often as they're the number one super sub for that operation. Do you subscribe to one of your teammates, Brian Geltzeiler's observations on this issue? Because I want to read you a couple tweets from him that you might be familiar with, but the audience might not. And he calls himself a proponent of the 65-game rule, but he says its existence while other teams are holding star players out is very inconsistent and hypocritical. Bottom line is that the players are being held to rules that the league's owners are abusing to, in this case, serve their own purposes. Where does that fit in?
I don't get what that. I need a little bit more elaboration. How is it being abused?
I guess he's saying that you're seeing owners basically decree that players be held out when it is advantageous to the tanking, for them getting what they want, and that that this manipulation is different than maybe going back a few years before these rules were instituted, when players themselves just said, I can take another day off. What's the difference? There's nobody who's going to stop me. It's a different motivation here with the same end.
Yeah. So it's bleeding into this whole tanking. Well, you could certainly, there's so much tanking going on now that you can certainly make that argument. That's the problem too, that Adam Silver has to address, is that weeks ago, we already knew the teams that were going to make the playoffs. It wasn't, usually that's really determined in kind of, March or sometimes as late as April. Yeah. But it seemed to be determined even earlier. And there's so many teams that just are just trying to play for the ping pong balls and trying to get, everybody's just going crazy about this is going to be the greatest draft since the LeBron draft with Dwayne Wade and Carmelo Anthony and, Darko Milicic for all the fans in Detroit who remember that Joe Dumars bundle.
Yeah,
but you could certainly what Geltzeiler's saying is you could go there with this, but the big thing after this year is, one of the things about tanking, and I've heard it, I didn't come up with it on my own, but I think one of the solutions could be prohibiting teams from having top 5 picks 2 years in a row.
Mm-hmm. I'd listen to that.
Do something like that.
Yeah.
Force teams like, guys, we'll give you a year, but then you can't do that. You're not going to get 2 top 5 picks in a row. You're not going to do what Philly did with, 3, 4, 5 years of the process. Something has to change. And until it does, this is going to blight the league going forward. I don't care how many teams they expand to, and how many guys come in who are all world talents. You can't have the bottom feeders being multiple teams that don't give their fans hope starting like January 1st. That's not good.
We still have a few games left, as you know, in the regular season. So I won't hold you to this as we actually get to the playoffs. But if you were forced to pick who will make the NBA Finals this year, today, as of today, where are you going?
Oklahoma City and Boston.
Interesting.
Well, Oklahoma City just got back Jalen Williams, an all-NBA performer. He missed, 26 out of 28 games. They're finally, I think tonight in Boston will be the 8th time their starting lineup will be together all year, 7th or 8th. So basically they've been depleted, but now everybody's back, and they're already basically on a pace. They should win right now. They're 57-15.
Yes, it's crazy.
They're going to go 67-15, but it's good that San Antonio's kind of on their heels. So I still think they're going to come out of the West between what I just said in terms of their roster, plus the fact they won last year, the fact that SGA is playing at MVP level. They've got all the answers, even though it's a brutal conference and they're going to have it's going to be a tough playoff run. And Boston, I know people are, what's wrong with their offense now that Jason Tatum's back and they're 6-2 in their last 8 and he's screwing up things, and which is absolutely absurd. But when you think about him coming back, they still have games to play. If they're rolling by the playoffs, I pick them over Detroit with the Cade Cunningham problem. They also have the problem of, I don't know if they have enough scoring in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I picked them over the Knicks because the Knicks are too up and down and inconsistent. I don't know how Mike Brown's going to be in his first playoff go-round in New York. And Cleveland is a defensive liability, which we knew when they got Harden. And they're going to have to outscore people in the playoffs. And Kenny Atkinson is, going public with, we can't win this way. But that's the way they're going to have to win. You got to play to your team's strengths. Even though they have the Defensive Player of the Year, Evan Mobley, their strength is not defense. It's going to have to be outscoring people. That'll catch up with them. That's why I like Boston in the East.
It makes sense. I can't really argue with either of those. Let me ask you a Wolves question, because right now, it's very fluid between the 4, 5, and 6, right? There's very little daylight between those teams. In fact, the Wolves are hosting Houston tonight. Wolves are 44-28. Houston is 43-28. So Minnesota's for the moment in the 5. Let's say Minnesota ends up in the 6, which they've been at for a while, and the Lakers stay at 3. The reaction from folks is fine. Yeah, we're fine with that. We know how to play the Lakers. We saw nobody picked us to win a year ago, and they dominated the Lakers. But then I've heard other people say, well, these Lakers, they may not have enough to win it, but they might be a different team than the Wolves played a year ago. Do you trust the Lakers any more than last year to be a formidable threat, even in the first round against the Wolves, or what do you make of them? Well,
it's interesting because the Lakers in the last few weeks, couple of months or whatever, they've been a little bit more serious about their defense. Ayton has been more of a factor at that end, as has Marcus Smart. So that makes them a little different. I know they got bludgeoned by the Wolves last year size-wise. That still could happen again. The fact that LeBron is accepting of his number 3 role is not surprising to me. I think he basically knows he has to do it. He's 41 years old, and he can't be 1 or 2 anymore. But they seem to have, been more successful there. Luka with the refs, ever since he got his 15th tee, which turned into the 16th, and of course you have to rescind it because it's Luka Doncic, so God forbid the league can suspend him for a game.
Too much.
But he has turned it off. He's totally shut up. So that's working for them big time. And they seem to, they won that crazy game against Denver at home.
Yeah, that's true.
A few weeks ago. They kind of caught fire. So they are a different team than last year. Whether that carries through in the playoffs, I don't know. I think they don't want to see Minnesota. I think they want to see Houston.
Probably true.
Of any team. And I would think if you're Minnesota or Denver, Houston's the team you want to see. They are not, they're not a good defensive team. They lack leadership, and that was a knock against Kevin Durant in Brooklyn. He's not a leader. Not as good a leader, let's say, other leaders. And they're a defensive train wreck. Now, Denver is too. But I think one of those teams is going to find, and I could be wrong, but I'll say if you're one of those teams, Denver, LA, or Minnesota, Houston's the team you want to see.
I think you're right.
Playoffs. And the other teams, is, that's going to be rougher.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. As I still would like the Wolves' chances against the Lakers, but I've tried to point out to people there are some differences here. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win the title, but there is some stuff to pay attention to this year. The assumption that was because it was easy last year that it would be again, I don't know. But I would rather right now, regardless, I'd rather play Houston early at least. And
to pile on Houston a little bit more, they're still looking for a point guard. They never addressed that.
Right.
Van Vliet, that was a big loss. And in terms of the leadership, Ime Udoka goes public and criticizes the team all the time. If you had a big-time leader in the locker room, he wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, that's 100% true. We'll be in touch as we get really close. As you know, we're not that far off now, but once we got matchups set and so forth, we'll be in touch. When's the next time you're on Sirius XM?
Oh, Scalabrini told me on the air. He said, "I'm going to tell you what Tom Thibodeau always told me: stay ready."
Yeah, that's
ready.
An inspiring message from Scal, isn't it?
With me, in terms of Thibodeau, there's not a minute's problem.
That's very, very true. Be well, my friend. We'll talk soon. Appreciate you.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Take care.
Talk to you later.
Absolutely. Mitch Lawrence, a longtime NBA writer in Dallas, where he was a teammate of mine back in another century. He went on to write out of New York as well, has covered the NBA literally for decades, and now is doing more broadcasting than writing. He has gone over to the dark side like so many of us. We have the top of the hour pause. By the way, we will be doing the top 5 at 5. I hope Brett Blakemore is prepared for that. We got John Bream to talk music in about a half hour. We've got Kessler to join at 5:30, carrying the water of the Vikings, I'm sure, regarding our efforts to bring the National Football League draft to Minnesota.